Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Men in Red 97 podcast. I, as always, am Alan, the pole with the goal. And that goal is to really tone down on the amount of Dr. Pepper I drink this week, as I'm holding up a bottle of Dr. Pepper right now. Good stuff. I'm joined by my co-host, as usual, DJ.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Muy bien, ¿y tú?
Muy bien. And Monsieur Tim.
I'm very glad that you're cutting down on the Dr. Pepper. I'm not happy that you said that you wanted to replace it with pure vodka, but we can work around some of the choices there.
Mm-hmm.
Also, by the way, as you're speaking, because we record video, or we can see ourselves on video while we're doing this, Alan is drinking out of a, whatever, like the pint size, like Dr. Pepper thing.
Yeah, like
and
500
then
milliliters.
DJ just pulled, half liter or something like that, 16.9 fluid ounces, maybe, I don't know.
That's 16.9, yeah.
And DJ just pulled up a 2 liter of Pepsi. So yeah.
I may die young, but I will die with a smile on my face, a pop in one hand, and a pizza in the other.
Amen,
right?
I say to that, honestly.
I just am surprised that you're drinking Pepsi as opposed to doing the Florida thing that you're supposed to do with sugary drinks and like putting it on the radiator of your truck so you can use it as a marinade for gator meat. But whatever.
No, that's further north than I am. That's further north.
Incroyable. So, what is the topic of this episode today? Tim, would you like to explain to our audience?
Well, we don't have a head coach, for starters. There has not been a head coach announcement. We expect that it is going to come soon. The team has said that it may be coming as soon as the week that we release this, pending some options and some information about some decisions by lawyers and stuff like that. And, never predict.
Basically, the contract is in the work.
The contract has been sent to lawyers is the way that it's been put.
Yeah, in that sense, yeah.
And if anyone has experience getting contracts to lawyers, everything is great and honky-dory up to the point that you think that it's fine and then things take forever. So we'll see. I would expect that there will be a new head coach shortly after this episode is released. But in the meantime, I think that it's worthwhile kind of like looking and thinking a little bit about the coaching search process and what it is that we'd like to see from a head coach, what the things are that we think the Fire need to be looking for, and what some of the issues with coaching may have been, because they're now under, have now hired 2 head coaches full-time under Georg Heitz, and Klopas has been in the role for roughly like 2/3, nearly 3/4 of a season, between 2 spans as interim head coach.
Yeah, because he was like the last quarter of one season when Wiki left, and then he was here for basically like 2/3 of Ezra's tenure, I think.
Yeah, I mean, more or less. Like, yeah, it was less than half of the way through the season.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course there were like other key matches that happened under Klopas's watch.
While Wiki was out,
the majority of the, well, I was saying more this time around, the majority of the US Open Cup run, which I think was, memorable for a lot of us, even if it ended with disappointment and heartbreak and a lot of frustration with referees. The first Leagues Cup, that was like the full version of Leagues Cup, the second version of some kind of it the Fire participated in, where the Fire did make it out of the group stage with I think a pretty memorable win over Minnesota United. I will never forget Shaqiri like kind of like getting challenged by Dane St. Clair for some kind of mind game. And it literally was just like the difference between a boy and a man, which I think like that is like an all-time favorite Shaqiri moment. I think for however long he's in Chicago, I think that will be one of the moments that kind of sticks in people's head.
No, yeah, it was a fun moment.
But yeah, so Klopas was at the helm for the majority of the U.S. Open Cup, all but the U.S. Open Cup game against the House and the entire Leagues Cup run.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, in terms of that head coach search, were there any names that popped up pretty much other than Klopas? Because I feel like even when we ended up getting Ezra, Klopas's name was still popping up there. And of course, he's popping up again now. do we know of any other names that are popping up other than the man who obviously lives and breathes fire?
So
Ante
the team
Razov
has
got some mention. I know, but that was rare.
Ante Razov was one of the names that was put in the hopper. Bob Bradley was one of the names that has been kind of mentioned because he's in Norway. The assumption is that that's temporary. Bob Bradley was one of the names that was mentioned before Ezra was hired. So he would be returning to the Chicago Fire. Another name that had come up was Jesse Marsh. He was with the team for like a kind of reunion sort of event before a U.S. Open Cup game this season with Chris Armas, by the way. So that was another name that is mentioned. Chris Armas has now been named as the head coach of Colorado. Literally, I've got someone that I know that covers the Colorado Rapids. In the course of a press conference and what was announced in the hours afterwards with the roster decisions, they went from being optimistic about how good of a coach Armas was going to being incredibly pessimistic about it, which makes me think that my over-under of Colorado fans taking 5 games to get really pissed off with Armas' hire, maybe take the under with that. So who knows? Chris Armas, don't count him out as the next coach, head coach for the Chicago Fire, because he could get fired from Colorado and work his way into the conversation between now and whenever the announcement is made.
Yeah. I can't remember who said that, like, Chris Armas as head coach would be either like one of the greats or like an absolute flop. I think DJ, you're the one that said that.
That sounds like something I would say. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I did.
I know for the longest time, basically ever since, I'm pretty sure this was the St. Louis game, the U.S. Open Cup game, when Jesse Marsh came over and he talked with a bunch of like the season ticket holders. A lot of people have been wanting him back. Matt especially wants to bring Marsh into the conversation.
I feel like, here's the thing about signing Marsh. If you sign Marsh, that basically means Heights is on an extremely short leash. Because there is no way Marsh is going to come over, and after being in Europe for so long with everything, there's no way he's coming over with Heights being the guy that's making all these moves.
True. Yeah, no.
So
it went, I'm sorry, Tim, because we've been mentioning Heights and like the idea of the short lease and everything like that. And just in the past few seasons, we haven't really had a manager stay for what, more than 2? Because Wiki stayed through 2020 and then he left in like around 2021.
Towards the end of 2021. And now the team did indicate at the time that part of the reason that he left was that his father had serious health concerns.
Yeah, like it was,
and
a family
so they
thing.
knew his contract was up. They knew they were not going to be bringing him back for 2022. So they decided that the best thing for all parties was to let him go and spend time with family at the end of 2021, rather than have him see out a contract knowing he wouldn't be back.
Yeah, it's a music reference that I'm making, but when you have a program that, you know, is in turmoil because there's just no long-term person there, I want to see someone that comes in and just builds something long-term. Because right now, everything has been so short-term, and you can definitely, when short-term directors come in, students aren't happy usually because there's no continuity. There's no actual clear vision going on. And I'm definitely thinking that's what a lot of the players are thinking as well. They're like, there's no long-term vision. And I just would like to see someone that will come in and just build something for the long term. Like, I would like to see, even if it's a rough start, because, you know, nothing ever starts off completely perfectly unless you're Ange Postecoglou at Tottenham until Chelsea ravages with injuries through that team, but that's another thing. I just want to see something more long term. I just feel like everything has been so in and out, in and out. Like, I legitimately, for the past season, forgot about Ezra. Like, it's like he was here for, it's such a short tenure, and like it was just in and out essentially.
So I think that part of the issue that you're talking about the idea that a coach is going to be here for a long time. And I think that you've used the term coach and manager sort of interchangeably a little bit in the discussion,
Yeah.
which I think that we all sort of like switched somewhat between using kind of like more European phrases when discussing the sport and kind of like more North American phrases. But the idea, I think, of being a manager is slightly different than just being a coach, in that a manager, I think, has influence on the style of play on like a longer term and more influence on player signings than you think that's just being called a coach would. So I think that one of the challenges is if you bring a guy in just to coach a team, you get a certain kind of thing. And if you bring someone in to coach a team and also influence the player signings, the style of play, what the team's future is, you get something that's kind of different. And I think that what you were saying is you want someone that comes in and does sort of what Ange Postecoglou has done, both, first like in Scotland and, is starting to do with Tottenham, which is not just impose, like not just like coach players, but coach players, impose a style of play and get players in that fit a certain style that presumably will have some amount of tail that will possibly outlast him, even if, the results aren't great.
And it's also creating a culture in the clubhouse, essentially. You want a positive culture because that can also very much impact how successful a franchise or a program could be. That's one thing that, like, I love Ange Postecoglou, I'm loving Big Ange. And that's something he's done at all the clubs he's been at, including Spurs, including Tottenham. It's a culture change as well.
And I think that that's one of the things I think I agree. And I think that one of the issues the Fire have had, they have been, frankly, a team that has had trouble with results for a very long time. One playoff appearance now in basically a decade and a half. I mean, a little bit like 2 playoff appearances in a decade and a half if we're being technical about it. And I mean, in MLS, that is just unprecedented in terms of like, you had teams that were consistent wooden spoon winners like FC Cincinnati that went on to win a Supporters Shield in a couple of years. You had Toronto, who were an utter joke and then went on to being very good and winning MLS Cup.
And now they're back to being a joke, though.
Yeah, I mean, but like you still had that thing in the interim, right? Like, so they climbed a mountain. They like were in a valley, climbed a mountain, and fell down the other side of the mountain in the amount of time that the Fire have been, I don't know what, like hanging around the outskirts of a vale or something
roaming
like that.
The desert for 40 years, more like,
Exactly.
honestly.
That's what it sort of feels like. And we are parched for something significant like a win. We had 2017, which is a good season, into tragically short because of basically Tyler Adams' coming out party. Like it was him, like basically he was like the debutante of like, yeah, I'm going to be a name you're going to be hearing a lot about. Which is what it was. But I mean, that was one season, and that was one season that is more than half a decade ago at this point. So I agree with you. I think that the name you need for a head coach, it's not just a name. I think that the goal, what I would be looking for would be someone that has gravitas.
Yes.
Like if the Fire were to get Pep Guardiola, which I mean, they're not, right? But if they were, like if Pep Guardiola walks into the men's room and says, the soap that is in the men's room is not, it's affecting our performance and it's holding us back, that whoever he's talking to, the conversation would not be, what do you mean you're crazy? The conversation would be, okay, what soap do you need and how quickly can we get it to you, right? Like that's the conversation, because they have that level of authority that if they see something that needs to be changed, they ask for it and they get it. And I think that that's the kind of thing that Ezra, as a first-time head coach in the league, he could have said exactly the same thing and he wouldn't have had the same result because he doesn't have that gravity.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing with, in music and in the education world. When you step into, like, in your first year, like you're a brand new, fresh person out of university or whatever, you're not going to have the same, like, gravitas, and you're going to have, like, behavioral issues as well. You're going to have kids that test you. And and there might have been players that were testing him as well. So
yeah, and I think that it's one of those things where, again, like, you can be like very good at your job, but still the fact that you don't have, it's not about the ability, it's not about talent. It's just about the weight that is necessary.
Yeah.
And so that's why I've kind of thought that a name that has become available and that has been popped around with a couple clubs is Bruce Arena, who we don't know exactly what happened when he left New England. There have been hints. We know that it was about one of his assistant coaches and that he was, quote, one of the complainants. We know that assistant coach had been told that his contract wasn't being renewed. And I think a lot of people have kind of filled in the blanks and thought that it was a sort of like, well, frankly, almost like a backstabbing kind of thing. And again, we don't know all the details. We don't know what was said. We know that it was significant enough that there was a player revolt when that assistant coach that had made the complaint was then installed as interim head coach, to the point that that person stayed employed, but was no longer allowed to coach the first team.
Mm-hmm.
Which says something, right?
Yeah.
So the assumption that I think a lot of us are making is that whatever Bruce did was not that bad. He has more wins than anyone else in the history of this league. So he's one of those guys that he comes in and he says, this is a problem with the team. This is a problem with the club. He gets it changed because of who he is and because he's got that name and that experience and that weight. There's not a lot of names that do that. The other thing that he has got a good reputation for, despite having a reputation as being incredibly prickly with the media and sometimes, well, I mean, you can take the guy out of New Jersey, but you can't take the swear words out of his mouth.
Yeah.
So there's that. But I mean, people that have been in his locker rooms defend him to the hilt. Like, he's very popular with his players and he assembles a locker room full of players that have good vibes and a good sort of team feeling of like building towards something together. And New England, for a very long time where he had been, they had a reputation as being a club that hadn't spent, and Arena was able to get that to change. Obviously, spending has not been the problem in Chicago. And also a team that didn't really have an identity, and he created and sort of imposed an identity on that club that fell apart a little bit because of the way that he departed. But I think that if he had left under better terms, would have been able to endure for a while. So he was a name that I was thinking sort of made sense for the Fire to consider. Again, not knowing exactly what was said or what was done. And obviously there's things that could disqualify him from the conversation at the get-go. It's just the indications seem to be that may not really be the case.
Yeah. There were two other names that were mentioned / thrown around because they don't have a job, being Oscar Perea and Robin Frazier, since both of them are also jobless in terms of, that coaching position. Those were just names that were thrown out there, though, as a possibility.
I would love to see Frazier in Chicago. I'm not going to lie. I would love to see what he could do with actual money.
Interesting.
Because, you figure it's Colorado. They don't spend for anything. It's like, what would he actually be able to do here?
And I would say same thing about Oscar Pereja. Oscar Pereja is a guy, Orlando have occasionally spent big money on a DP. They have not consistently spent at a high level. He's always been on a budget. And he kind of hit a ceiling. And I think that one of the questions that a lot of people that watch the league is the ceiling an Oscar Pereja ceiling? Or is the ceiling a ceiling where he just has kind of reached the limit with what the guys that he has can do? And that's partly budget related. And he's out of contract as of now, because his contract expired at the end of the year, was not renewed. And he's got a lot of experience in the league as a manager. He's been managing in MLS since 2005, had a good stint with Dallas, had an okay stint with the Colorado Rapids, also coached in Liga MX for a year. So he's a name that I think is worth, considering. Another name that I believe the Fire may have, it's been rumored that it's one of the names that the Fire may have interviewed, is Pamadou Ka, who was a former Norwegian international, and has been an assistant in So he actually played in MLS for a while as well. Currently, or was an assistant, I believe he still is. I'm not sure if he was changed with a coaching change. An assistant in Charlotte, very well regarded. He's been assistant coach in several places in the league, and he's just considered to be one of the brightest kind of like younger coaching, up and coming coaching minds in MLS. But then you have the same issue you had with Ezra, where however good he is his first head coaching gig. And so does he have, can he go into a meeting with Georg Heitz and say like, look, this is the profile of X kind of player I need to happen sometime in the summer transfer window. And if not, we're not going to be in a position to compete. And does he get it because of that authority? Like, he would have less credibility there, I think, than some of the other guys.
Yeah. It all goes back to all these analogies that I'm making. That first year is always the difficult for like
right. No, when you're new in your job, when you don't have a track record, like you never have the same kind of power that you do somewhere else. And I mean, Paul Maduka, like it seems like it's universally agreed he's got a brilliant football mind, but like that doesn't necessarily mean. Well, I mean, let's put it this way: teams have been very successful in MLS with having coaches that are not brilliant football minds. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be Pep Guardiola to have success in this league. Like you don't have to this is not 3-dimensional chess.
No.
Like now I think that there is an opportunity for that. And I think that there have been coaches that one of Wilfred Nancy in Montreal and then in Columbus this past season, has had a very interesting style of soccer. He has clear ideas. And I think it's been exciting to watch that with his teams. But like Columbus won an MLS Cup with Greg Berhalter basically playing what was more or less, I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss it because it was successful, right? It was more or less like a boilerplate, sort of like MLS starter pack kind of had a template, and they won MLS Cup in 2020. So it works. And you don't have to be tactically super sophisticated in this league to have success. And I think that the Fire's biggest issue has not been a lack of tactical sophistication. It has more been, I think, that there has not been a winning culture. And a lot of the times, the guys that you get that are the great coaching minds, not that it necessarily has to be a male, but so far all Fire coaches have been. But the people that you get that are great coaching minds are not necessarily the ones that can go in and help repair a culture or establish a culture of winning, which I think is what the Fire need more than anything else.
It's all about culture. It's all about that culture in the locker room, on the pitch, off the pitch, and all that. All about the culture.
And with yogurt.
I could go for some yogurt.
Yogurt, kefir, yeah.
I haven't had none any in a bit. Any other bits about head coaching before we move on to some other details and topics we've had in the past few weeks?
So the team has indicated that there should be an announcement, like I said, sometime in this next week. So soon after releasing this, we don't know the full extent of what's going on, and the negotiations with lawyers and stuff like that. But I would expect that it would happen soon. If it does not, we'll see. The only other tidbits that we've got, in the interim before it's been released, the team has apparently interviewed, they said 11 candidates, which is a fair number. They wanted to really make sure that they were reaching out to minority candidates, which they're required to do to some extent, but they said that they were very concerned with going beyond that. So you can read into that what you will about who the ultimate hire was. And so we'll see.
Amen, we'll say to that. So basically almost right after we made the episode, it was fairly long, about talking about contracts of all the players currently, basically all those options were announced. I think almost right after we made that episode, just to briefly go through it. Some of them were obvious. Some of them were, interesting. Haile Selassie, who was formerly bought from Lugano on a contract through 26. Gall, Ritchie, Herbers, Dean, and Omsberg have had their options exercised. Kamara, I think we already knew that he was leaving, so his contract officially expired. Doumbia and Aceves, their loans have expired and they've went back to their parent clubs. Moniz, Burks, and Alan Rodriguez, they've been declined. And Javier Casas Jr., he's technically still in negotiations, possibly a Fire 2 senior deal instead of just like a senior first team.
I will say that's more speculation by me.
Mhm.
That's what they're negotiating because Matt has said, why is it that you would get rid of Alex but keep Javi? I'm fully of the opinion that it's just because Casas, they went to Javi and were like, listen, you're not going to be playing this year. You're playing with Fire 2. Do you want to just come back as Fire 2? Moniz, he knows he's better than that. And Javi right now is like, I don't even know where Javi is right now. So that's my speculation.
Any other comments we have on this? Because I mean, like I mentioned, a lot of this is pretty obvious. I think the only
I was somewhat surprised that Doumbia wasn't renewed.
That was the one I was going to say, that we thought we would have seen a similar situation to Gaston, that his contract would have been brought down from a DP, but he would have.
Well, we knew that was that was publicly stated. I mean, publicly stated, and there had been a reporting from Tom Bogert and others that the plan was that he would not be coming back as a DP, so that spot would be open. But what was kind of interesting is the team kind of spoke about how the style of play that he had didn't really fit a league like MLS, where it's a league that is fast and it's a league that's fairly physical. And that speed of pace and physicality didn't really meet Doumbia's game. And when you think about it, like the best game that he had was against Club America, who are a very good team. I mean, they're a team that is deeper and like stronger in a lot of ways than any team in MLS, but they played a very different style than an MLS team. So the fact that he was more limited against MLS opponents than he was against them, it doesn't say a lot. It doesn't say anything against who Doumbia is as a player, just against the style that he plays and what he brings versus what this league kind of demands.
Mm-hmm. So there were some supporter meetings that happened recently. One happened actually a few days ago as recording. Tim, were you able to go to any of them?
Yeah, I was at the one at 11:30. It was a good, November 30th. It was a good meeting. Fairly well attended. I don't think that a lot of the information that's released there is necessarily 100%. I mean, even though it's a public forum and anyone can go, I think that it's not the kind of stuff that people want to broadcast. But it was like there was good representation both from supporters and the team there. Dave Baldwin, the team president, was there. Eddie Rock was there from the sporting side. Caddy was there from, I guess he's kind of been on both sides of the fence at different points, but he was one of the ones that's been responsible for making sure the new performance center gets underway, which they have got positive news that they're really hoping that will be open basically a year from now, which is great. So it was overall, I think, it's good that the team is reaching out to supporters like that. It is the kind of thing that every team does in certain ways in certain circumstances. I don't know of other teams that are having meetings with supporters that didn't make the playoffs, like when the team didn't make the playoffs and they're meeting with supporters now still during the season. And I kind of think that says something, at least about what the team is trying to do in terms of communication. I should also say, obviously, like Les Mojica was there. She's the supporter liaison. And I mean, she just, there's no chance in heck she wouldn't be at a meeting like that.
Yeah, Leslie's a great person and we love her. Love the work she does with the supporters group. All right.
Oh, the only other thing worth saying, I guess, is I don't think that full pricing for individual matches has been released yet, but it does look like, I mean, in general, tickets in MLS have gotten significantly more expensive over the past, say, decade or so. As of tickets for a lot of live events. Supporters tickets, I think the team has made an effort to keep them relatively affordable.
Yeah.
And if I will say that, like, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably would be a person that's having like that knows enough about the game and that knows enough about the club and that cares enough to have a good time in the supporters section. And I think that my experience dealing with supporters groups, like multiple different supporters groups, is that they all welcome someone. And if you think that you'd like to fit in with them, like they would welcome you. And even if you're just there as an unaffiliated supporter, like generally speaking, like they've been, I think, welcoming to people as long as you sort of like basically just abide by like social conduct 101 of like not of like sort of like reading the room, like, and being friendly to those around you. There's clearly exceptions to that. So, but it, you know, if you're trying to make it to matches next year, I think that supporters tickets are probably going to be far and away the most affordable way to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's something to consider.
I mean, I'm a living example of like you mentioned. I came into the Fire first as just like I went to games. I was in like one of the corners buying a corner flag for games, and then I started going into the supporter section. And for the longest time, I was just like I was just unaffiliated. I'd bounce between groups, both like the La Banda Roja, Sector Latino, Barn Burners, Red Line. I've jumped with between all of them, and like in terms of like just being within that group at games. And you know, and at one point I've sort of like settled in, and I found like the group of people that I like to be with. You know, Men in Red is one. And yeah, it's, and like you say, like these people are very accepting. As you know, you read the room, you know, like what is proper game etiquette essentially. Because there are some people that
don't wear a Messi jersey.
Oh yeah, oh my god, that was so funny. For the Miami game, there was at least 2 people that tried to go into the supporter section with Miami jerseys of some sort, and both times we basically were like, officer, them, and we like booed them out, and it was so funny. And we'd yell like F Miami or where is Messi? It's that.
But you know what's kind of funny is like a lot of other clubs did have like, I mean, there was pink, or there was like, you know, white and blue stripes in the supporter section. And I'm not talking Miami home games here. So I think that is something that like, you know, the Fire should get credit for, both with the supporters and the way that they handled it, as well as the way that the club handled it. I think they did a good job. And it looks like the supporter section, by the way, they did say that there were double-digit increases. I think they said 22%, something like that, of increase in supporters tickets versus sold versus last year. And this is before single match tickets have even been released. And this is before the season has started. And so that's probably going to just go up from here.
You know, and my hope is only that more, you know, of course, more people get in, but also that more of these supporter section tickets are going to actual supporters. Because I do think there is, I don't want to say it's a problem, but it's an annoyance when there's people that go into the supporter section to simply get cheaper tickets to be like front 2 rows rather than actual support. Like, and in the last few games, especially like the Miami game or like the Charlotte game, we were really like doing our damnedest to get people to actually stand up and support, you know. And you definitely can tell. And I took a picture of it, I think, at the Charlotte game, when the result was going south, that the front 2 rows of some of the like supporter sections were empty because those were the people that were there not to support, rather just to get cheap tickets. So, yeah, hopefully that goes well. And in terms of ticket prices, you know, it's good that they're trying to keep that on the low, because it's been sort of circulating in the news recently with the league that, you know, that Miami has sold out of all tickets season wise, even though that they've doubled in price essentially. And I've seen like a lot of clubs, I think New York as well, have been doing like ticket packages. I know the Fire's been doing it. And I remember seeing a fine print at the bottom for the in the Red Bull thing, that it was like, because their ticket package was that you would get the home opener, and then against for the Hudson River Derby, so against NYC, and there was a little fine print that said if the first game of the season is Inter Miami, the ticket thing offer will be to the second game of the season. So, you know,
and Charlotte had a similar package, and what they said was if the first game of the season against Miami, don't worry, you're good. In the fine print.
That's funny.
So I thought that was quality trolling. But yeah, no, to be clear though, I do expect that Fire tickets, both, you know, well, Fire renewal season tickets went up if you didn't get them within a certain pre-sale period. Tickets for new season ticket holders have gone up in most cases substantially. I don't expect single match tickets to do the same thing. I think that what has changed is it used to be that a supporter's ticket was cheaper than a ticket in an adjacent section, but not necessarily that much cheaper than a ticket in the adjacent section. I think that we're now entering an era where we're almost talking two completely separate kinds of products. And the team has been pretty open about discussing the fact that they don't view supporters tickets as a way to make money, so much as they do as a way to sort of like build support and atmosphere. Having said that, like they're not, it's not like we're talking about like a $5 ticket or anything like that. Like they are substantial money for, I think, a lot of people that end up going to matches. But I would think that the gulf between a supporter's ticket and other tickets is going to continue to widen. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was difficult to just buy an individual match ticket, like a sort of like walk up, quote unquote, even though no one does that anymore because we all have, smartphones, to a match for under $50 if you were outside of a supporters section.
Yeah.
Which is a very different world than I think where we were even like 5 years ago in MLS, where you could get decent tickets to a lot of matches for like $20.
Yeah. All right. A few other little details that we have here. One that is sort of interesting, and I definitely think we could talk a lot about it, and that is source from Tom Barlow that the Chicago Fire have agreed to a deal to acquire forward Tom Barlow from New York Red Bulls. Not just sources anymore, confirmed from
team sources have confirmed that Tom Barlow will be joining. It can't be officially announced because there's kind of a moratorium on doing that until after the end of MLS Cup, which makes sense in a way. There's a match that is being played right now as we are recording this. So
I also,
you get why.
I also paused to think that I was like, is it can't be announced officially as like, we can't say it or the team can't say it, but no, it's that the team can't. Okay.
Right. But they have spoken publicly about Tom Barlow joining the team. They believe he's a good fit for some of the things they're looking for. They did say that they are looking for him to play fewer minutes ideally than he has at the Red Bulls, substantially. So that's a part of it. And I think reading between the lines, one way that you could look at his signing is sort of a Kai Kamara replacement, but I think that that's not necessarily the right way to look at it, because I think that Kai Kamara ended up being the preferred striker for a lot of the season. I mean, he was getting a lot of starts, and I was not expecting that. I don't know how either of you feel.
Yeah. Little details about it. He is 28 years old. He has 3 goals and 34 appearances with New York Red Bulls. 20 of them were starts. 2 of the goals were in the playoffs. So the deal is apparently worth up to $400,000 in GAM funny money, $250K up front with 150 add-ons, reportedly $125K in 24 and 25 with a 10-goal add-on alongside an additional one if Barlow is still in the club in 26. Reportedly, Eddie Rock said he will walk the check to New York if he scores 10 goals. His salary will be around 195.
So we're assuming, that's the thing that I typed into the notes. We're assuming that he's on the same contract, which is not necessarily guaranteed.
Yeah, that's why his contract.
Yeah, so his contract with the Red Bulls, because when in MLS, it's like most other North American leagues where
you buy their
if
contract.
you're traded, like you're making the same money.
Yeah.
Unlike, if you're sold in Europe or sold to Europe or South America or wherever, where it's a new deal. But yeah, he's making about $200K a year. So that means that his overall cap hit is going to be something like $325K-ish a year, which puts him a little bit above Kai Kamara. But I mean, obviously, like that was sort of a unique proposition where you're getting a guy that was out of contract. I mean, you don't have one of the top 5 scorers in league history available as a free agent every offseason,
Yeah.
right? I mean, obviously, again, I mean, ironically, of course, like that's the situation that we're once again in because Kai Kamara is again a free agent, but he's not coming back to the Fire.
No, yeah. And yeah, so he makes about the same, like for reference, Freddie Montero in Seattle, Ethan Zubak in Nashville. It's about the same. So, and also fun fact, he played college soccer with Chris Mueller over in Wisconsin. So, little fun fact, little tidbitty. So maybe he had some sort of influence in terms of getting him from New York to Chicago.
And as someone on Reddit pointed out, and I do not read anything into this because, but Tom Barlow was briefly coached by Jesse Marsh at the Red Bulls.
And yeah. Interesting.
So yeah, the idea that like I guess the operating theory would be then Jesse Marsh, then who's been a dream sort of like coaching hire for a lot of Fire fans, even though he's indicated that he doesn't really want to be coaching for the immediate future and is enjoying some time to sort of like rest and think about where he wants to go in his life. But the idea is that Jesse Marsh said, okay, well, I'll coach the Fire, but not if you can't get Barlow.
Yeah.
I will read too much into this.
Yeah, don't read too much into it.
I'm sure that they get along. I do not think that that was a statement that Jesse Marsh has ever said. And that has nothing to do with whether or not he's going to be coaching the Fire. And nothing to do with whether or not Tom Barlow is going to be a good player.
Yeah. Of course, another thing that's been mentioned in a lot of these meetings or in questions is the DP striker. It's going to happen very soon. Or like for next season, there will be a DP striker. So, with Barlow coming in as well as a DP striker, it's likely that Casper's not going to stay for much longer, as pretty much was expected. And also probably means that Misa and Becerra will be with Fire 2 for another season.
I think we can tell everyone that it's Harry Kane.
Yeah, it's Harry Kane.
Yeah.
He's already done with Bayern.
He kept on. Well, his issue was that he kept on wearing the same lederhosen and didn't wash them. So
no, he's tired of living in that hotel because apparently he still doesn't have a house in Germany. His family. So like his wife and his kids have been living in England while he's been living in like a hotel suite in Munich. So I guess he just wants to live in a proper house in Chicago now. As we mentioned,
yeah, I don't think that the issue is that there's no houses in the Munich area that he can afford because, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's certainly actually what I've been hearing is that they're going to bring in both Harry Kane and Lewandowski at the same time.
That would be a dream, honestly.
That's not going to happen, guys.
Lewandowski, Mueller, and Harry Kane. Just imagine that front three.
Yeah. And in terms of...
I like these. Do you mean Chris Mueller or Thomas Mueller?
Thomas Mueller.
I was about to say.
Okay, I thought you were saying Chris Mueller. I'm like, I mean, I like Chris Mueller as much as the next Fire fan, but what's up?
Incroyable.
Just imagine Thomas Mueller and Chris on the same field. Hey, Mueller. Both turn around like, what?
Yeah. Hey, Mueller. I mean, I guess for one, they would say Mueller, and the other way they'd be like Mueller. They'd use the German pronunciation, Thomas Mueller. As we mentioned earlier, the MLS playoffs are going on right now. The Hell is Real Derby is being the Eastern Conference Final. And what is the current score, Tim?
It is 2-0 for Cincinnati. So
interesting.
That's not what I would have predicted. We are starting the second half. And honestly, as much as I can tell, and I don't know if it seemed like I've been distracted, but if I have been, that's why. It looks like Cincinnati has been playing their game plan reasonably well against the Crew. Yeah. Which, to be honest, it's one of those things where there's a lot of like Cincinnati missing some parts, and I think a lot of us think that Columbus are sort of like still not at their peak with what they can do with the style they've been playing and stuff like that. But so far, so good. And for Cincinnati, at least.
Man. And then later tonight will be the Western Conference Final, LAFC against the Houston Dynamo. So another one.
So here's the cool thing about time travel. Everyone listening will know what happens in that match, and we will not.
No, it kind of sucks.
We're still in the dark.
We don't know. All I'm going to say is that someone's going to win. It's going to be a team that wears black in their logo or in their colors.
Yeah, that's a fairly safe bet.
Yeah.
They will also be from the Western Conference.
That is true because it is the Western Conference Final.
They'll be from one of the two largest states in the country.
Yeah, and of course.
Oh yeah. Lots of things we can tell you.
What
we can't tell you is who won, but you know that already.
What
so
we can
we're
tell
just
you,
jealous of you.
Yeah, but what we can tell you is that as we're still looking, as us three, we're looking. As the club's looking for more players. There's a chance that they're looking around MLS for a central midfielder for the future. So there's a possibility that Gaston might not stay around. Also questions about Federico's future. That's been sort of in the mix. And then Chris Mueller said he's feeling ready for next season. Apparently he ran 7 miles in under an hour today and that he streamed it all on his Instagram story.
Well, he streamed the aftermath and the man was quite literally steaming coming off his body. Wow. So, yeah.
Incredible.
So he's ready to run.
I mean, hey.
What's the average? I want to say the average for a winger running is something
distance?
10 to 12. Yeah, distance is 10 to 12 clicks in a match.
Mm.
I feel like I may have heard that somewhere. So that's basically
around 7 miles for the average player.
So Chris basically ran what a player has to do in 90 minutes and 60 minutes. So I would say that at least in terms of running, you're ready to come back.
Yeah, I mean he's working for it, and I definitely would like to see him back. He has the determination for it.
And he's been really he's documented the recovery process. I feel like this is one of the things that a lot of fans don't really get to see that well.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. It's difficult emotionally. It's difficult physically. I mean, there's a lot of self-doubt that goes on when you have a gift that obviously has physical components and you just wonder if it's taken away from you forever. And I think that he did a good job documenting the process in a way that I think helps humanize it. I think that it's sort of the kind of thing that it's too easy for a lot of us to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
As people that are just watching the sport, but injuries happen, but they really can be devastating. And it's not just this thing that you see on the pitch and, cry about and are like, oh man, it sucks that he's not in the 11. They're very difficult. It's as hard or harder to recover from injury than it is just to keep on playing.
Yeah, and there was an NFL player that he did an interview or a podcast or something, and he talked about what it was like to be injured, and he says it's almost like you're a ghost in the training facility. You have your own schedule, you're away from the team, you have to work with a separate staff on recovery and stuff like that, your own regime, and you're just very much isolated. Since you're not playing with or you're not really doing anything with the rest of the team. And
so I've talked to an NFL player about different ways of handling that process. And I think that it's kind of unfortunate that it seems that in soccer, they still sort of are doing the thing where if you're injured, it's like you've got the plague,
mm-hmm.
And are keeping you away. Some NFL clubs, you're on your own schedule, but you're still basically invited to go to the normal practices. And the nice thing is for players that wanted to coach or something like that, it's a good way to sort of see what happens in practice sessions from a different perspective and
the other side of the table.
I mean, exactly. And then you're there and you're involved, and it's not you're a forgotten face the same way that it's sort of you're in the locker room changing to leave the same time that players are in the locker room changing to go into training or whatever it is. So,
well, if you guys, that's pretty much it that we all from us today. The only thing I will say, I just got this blick from ESPN, if you care, that Alabama has beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. So,
but again, listeners are living in the future, so they all know that.
No, that's true. They all know that. But no, because this is completely random. I started this season watching college football because of one person, that is Pat McAfee. Because they put him on College Game Day for ESPN, and he is like one of the funniest people ever. Like right before the game, he on the game day show, he was singing the like a chant for Georgia fans, and all the Georgia fans were like, yeah, and then he's like, give me Alabama, they're gonna win. And everyone was like, what? It was just funny. He's just a funny character. And a lot of people are commenting that he has made the college football experience a lot better. So that's how I got into it. That's just something I wanted to throw out there. I know no one cares.
Cool story, bro. Let's talk more about MLS. I'm kidding. I know. You
do this every time, Tim. Every time.
What do I do every time?
You find a way to just shut me down.
You found a way to bring up your new introduction to college football as a man that's about to graduate from college. Like, what do you want me to do with this?
Early pop, I don't know. Anyways, do you guys have any last words of wisdom to depart with our fans?
Something they cannot hear, but
I was about to say, I don't know if they can
hear that. Tim and Alan heard it.
Yeah.
We just heard a yellow card sound.
Yeah.
Basically.
They just heard a bird going.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to say, I'm not trying to shut you down, Alan. I'm just,
I know.
Keep us focused and,
I know. I know. I just wanted to.
But I mean, if you wanted to do that for one of the podcasts, then we're talking content. And I think that me and all of our listeners, so when Alan sometime in the next few months chooses Cincinnati or Columbus to beat the Fire, when we're covering those teams, it's I just feel we'll know where that comes from. He's just doing a content thing. Yeah. It's not that he loves us any less.
Amen, I say to that. All right. Well, as always, I have been Alan, the Pole with the Goal, joined by fellow co-hosts DJ and Tim, and as always,
come on, Red. Wait, Jinx, you owe me a soda.